be with us. And while you're doing that, oh, hi, Laura.
Hi, call me Lori. I'm a Wilshire
Lori, okay.
Boulevard person,
Uh-huh.
and I thought the movie was adorable.
Good, good. Had you been aware of our group before tonight, or this?
Yes, and I've attended a couple before.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't acknowledge that.
That's
Joel
okay.
Jaspin, maybe I'll be more accurate this time. Are you a newcomer to the group?
Yes, I'm a newcomer. I'm on the East Coast, and I'm related to Mitch and Sherry Stein.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
they recommended the movie to us, and we watched the movie, and we're anxious to. My wife and I, Helene, are anxious to participate.
Well, you're welcome to participate even in the movie discussions that Mitchell doesn't like. But we've had pretty good luck with him so far. I want to start out with you, Mitch, because last week when I announced this film, you gave a thumbs up, really right away. So you'd seen it before. And
I've seen it twice now, and it brings home so much about the relationships of fathers and sons that really touched my heart, and about the people that are the haves and the have-nots. And it came together in a very succinct manner that these people enjoyed their life in a very basic way, and they survived fishing. And the motto of the story, of course, is you don't feed a person who's homeless, you teach them how to fish.
right.
And this was a very meaningful movie, I thought.
Right. What masquerades as a pleasant jaunt and a happy ending, with a happy ending, it really becomes about a lot of issues, because these people, it's not just that they're happy with their lives are meaningful to them. And as we'll see when we parse our way through the movie, that the pub becomes central. It's like the ark, or the covenant, the main sanctuary for that thing called social communion and connection to each other, which it wasn't quite as clear to me. I thought the pub was just a convenient gimmick, but as I watched it again, this is like the third time I've seen it. That relationship, that connection to the ocean, to the people, because remember, these families go back hundreds of years with each other. So in a way, I don't want to get too Talmudic or biblical on us, because that's not me, but they're talking about their ancestors, and they really believe in this heritage, not just the superstitions, but the bond that happens when you go fishing with somebody. So we'll come back to that. That's one of the first notes I had made to talk about that. Does anybody else want to chime in generally without ruining the movie for the discussion? I take it you're all here because you liked it. Risa?
I just kept having the word peoplehood and community run through my mind. And if you look up the word peoplehood, the examples are always Jewish, because peoplehood really refers to Judaism in a very deep way. And these people show it. These people show community and peoplehood.
Well, like I said in Torah study this morning, it's all about a guy. It's nothing Jewish, but it's all about a guy who's as much of a mensch as anybody. The values, the meaningfulness is the same.
Right. Well, that's peoplehood.
But that's news to me. Why does peoplehood, which sounds like a very newly minted word, have a Jewish connotation?
It just does. It was started with the Jewish people. We referred to ourselves as having a peoplehood. And that was, to my knowledge, the first time the word was used. But if you go to whatever dictionary Google uses, they give a general description of the word peoplehood, and both examples that they give are Jewish, which is what I expected when I looked it up. So the origin of peoplehood is the Jews see themselves as a peoplehood. And that's why this resonated so much, that it was a Jewish theme, if you will, that could relate to us very well, because community is very important.
Very important. Life and death important to these people, as we find out as the film goes along. And that's one of the things I found interesting about the film, is that it's fun all the way through, but it gets seriouser and seriouser as you go through it. And then you hit rock bottom with the pub, and they all rally around it. But, you know, it's funny when I was watching it with my son, and who's 26, and he said, "Oh, well, I knew the guy was going to save the pub." And I said, "Yeah, but that was more technicality. It's like, I don't want to say gilding the lily, but it sort of summed up what their life together meant." And, you know, teetotalers would say, but alcohol was a big part of it. And, you know, I say, yeah, it's empathy. You know, it's really when you see people connecting with each other, you feel like you're connecting with them. So without getting too Talmudic about it, let's go back to the beginning. And it's a lovely beginning because we're introduced to the three groups of people right away. We've got the men fishing, and then we got the guys in the car, including the guy who's sleeping late before they go off on holiday. And then the mother, the Alwyn, the single mom. And they all three come together pretty quickly. And that's with the wrong turn down the one-way street. And the guy, you sort of see Danny set up because his boss, the black executive, charges him to go out and tell her to back up. You know, typical city guy that makes country people hate us. And what happens? Anybody want to take that apart? Come on, it's not rocket science.
Frank has his hand up, or actually,
The
Frank,
better half.
unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Frank,
No,
unmute
Frank,
yourself.
Yvette had her hand up first.
You have to unmute yourselves. You're muted.
Lower left corner.
Okay. Two things. One, of course, in answer to your specific question here, of course, the big city slicker thought he could throw his weight around these country peasants or whatever, and turns out that he was going the wrong way on a one-way street, and so there. Yeah, he didn't know this territory. He was out of his own element.
So
and that was interesting.
yeah,
But
right away it's
I
fish
wanted-
out of water, isn't it? Right away, they're foreigners.
I had my hand up earlier because when you said generally overall, and this is just a jump that might set the, for whatever further details we have, I felt like I've seen part of this movie, the scene, the setup before, but I haven't seen the exact story. There have been many movies, of course, and stories of city people becoming enchanted with the simpler country living, or in this case, fishing village, remote village kind of thing. And that's, you know, that's a common theme. It's been done. I also felt with the, you know, coming to the rescue of to get the pub back into village hands, that I almost felt it was like Jimmy Stewart, It's a Wonderful Life, when the people come together. So there are, you know, there are common themes that are thrown together. And I enjoyed it. It was an enjoyable, delightful, uplifting movie. But on the hand, I can't say I felt it, you know, it was so original and whatever, but it was done very well.
Well, interestingly, there's I don't want to call it an academic theory because it's too base for even that. But there's a notion that there are only 29 stories in the whole world. And every story told is a variation on the 29 themes.
Possibly.
And you know, it's like, it's what you do with it, you know, and this film charmed most of us, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, you just learn to love it. Love the one you're with, you know.
My point that I wanted to bring up was, yes, this was charming, was a lovely movie, was well done, but they got along a little too well. There was no one who didn't agree with everybody. There was no antagonist in the movie.
Well, no, I disagree. Danny was the antagonist, and he had his own antagonist, which was his coworkers back in London.
Well,
So
yeah.
everybody's working against pressures. You know, they have different needs and concerns, and responding differently until suddenly, and in a way, this is how the film changes so delicately, and is very finely nuanced, is how people with polar opposite concerns, like city and country, can somehow find common ground. You know, forgive me for saying Palestinians and Israelis, But my friend who had trained both sides, their negotiators in coming to terms with each other, she said, the only way you get to know somebody is to see them as a person. You can't, you have to really make yourself vulnerable enough to see their lives from their point of view. And then maybe you can say, oh, I can relate to that. So it's a soft film. I think you're right. That there's not much of an antagonism there, except that he does have an uphill road to climb. So I'd like to go into his first pitch. Well, let's go back. There's a really cool moment when the music guys hear the shanties and the boss, the black boss, says, oh my God, no, that song's an exploitation of the workers, just like my people, going over for slavery or coming to England. And it's like, it's so woke, it's satiric in that this wealthy guy, clearly more prosperous than the others because he's got a BMW, pulls this woke thing where, no, it's terrible music. Nobody could like it because it's not cool anymore. And of course, the fishermen see it from the complete opposite. Now, they're not about to, all those white-faced fishermen, they're not about to yield. So yes, they're conservative from that point of view, but they're basically clinging to their own support network. But I thought that was very cool, and something that could only, I guess this film was finished and came out in 2020, was, that reflects its current point of view. Where everything is a game for to be called working against itself. But the first refusal when Danny approaches them in the pub, right, the easiest place to meet them, what's their reaction when he says, I'd like to sign you, I've never heard a sound like yours? What do? They laugh at him.
They laugh.
It's a shared belly laugh. And if anything, it says, we are so united, we all get the joke, or the joke's on you, buddy, because that's not why we do it. That's not who we are. And you have no idea. Yeah, Risa.
Yeah, just before we go any further, I just have to say, overall, I loved the music. I loved the music.
I watched it with subtitles, with English subtitles, and believe me, for some of these British films, it does help. You get both the nuances of the performance because you know the language, and then you get every word. So those of you who've been in movie theaters, maybe your pet peeve in a subtitled movie, or what did he say? And like it wrecks the whole movie for about 10 seconds for you because it pulls you out of it. So that helps if you're at home and you have a hearing impaired. So they laugh at him, and he's kind of a tough music guy, but he's the softest one of the lot. Why do we know that? Because she gets out of her car in the confrontation on the one-way street, calls him a tosser. Do people know what a tosser is?
No.
It's a pejorative British term for a homosexual. And the daughter repeats it. Oh, the tosser's at the door, 7-year-old girl.
I didn't know what that was. So.
Yeah, well, Doris, I'm not surprised. Nobody else did either. It's only sophisticated, Brits like me who get it. So she comes out and she tells him what for, and he backs down, and he has to go to his buddies and say, we're backing up. It's not the other way around. I failed. So he's the softy in the group, and and humiliated for the first time of many. And then they laugh at him. But then he asks somebody, hey, well, how do I make any progress with you guys? And somebody, I think it may be Jago, the father, the older man, says, you got to go to Jim. He's the Alwyn's father, who barely looks old enough to be your father. But convince him and the others will go along. So there is kind of like a
Hierarchy.
de facto leader. They have no one spokesman because they all treat each other like a family, and they all have equal speaking rights at the pub. So but how do you get to him? Well, the fishermen say, you only know a man unless you go out to sea with him. So he's late. He gets on the boat, though, gets sick, of course. But that sort of picks him up a notch. So this is part of the parsing of the movie and its relationships between Danny and the others. He earns, some respect because he got on the boat with them. He didn't just plunk down for a beer and talk to them at the bar and make his pitch. That's really an outsider. And they talk amongst themselves, and somebody says, well, I guess we have to take a man on his word because we owe the same courtesy and extension of our generosity to him. So they sit down and talk, and they kind of make a deal. But then something happens. 30 minutes into the movie, Danny calls and he says, I've signed them. And they say, you fool, we were just kidding. Nobody wants them. It's death. And he pushes back. He tries to convince them. He fails. So he suggests they make a demo. And Danny tries on his own. I mean, the film glosses over how did he get the recording equipment, and all, they had the microphones, but how did he get it all? And how does he know how to do it himself? But the seagulls get in the way of the music. So they go to the church, which is a place where, again, that takes it up a notch because the idea to go to the church comes from Alwyn. There are good acoustics there. So it comes from one of them and he goes along with it. So it's another ingratiation. Not that he does it to agree with them. He just says to himself, I don't know what else to do, so I'll do that. And sure enough, the acoustics are great and it flatters their voices. And they record the demo, 9 demos. And then what happens? He needs a 10th so he can send it around. Come on, you're making me spill all the beans, and we're going to
That's the solo. That's the beautiful solo about the widow.
The beautiful solo. They're drinking beer outside, and he sings this song about a widow. And it's very moving to all of them. And even Danny says, that's beautiful. So that's another shared moment where he gets to understand their feelings about community. So it's all these little baby steps they're taking with each other until he goes out with them again, and then something really big happens. The guys in the flak jackets and the black helmets come. It's the police. You're not allowed to fish on here. You didn't pull permits to do that. And what happens? Danny, because he doesn't want, his photo op, he's convinced, by the way, we've ignored his relationship with Alwyn, which progresses because he says, I need to take some photos. And she says, well, I could do that for you. So it's these little incremental changes in her attitude towards him and his appreciation of her that advance that relationship. So Danny, thinking like a music producer, doesn't want his photo app to be ruined because he's out on the boat with all 10 fishermen. So he goes to the officer and he really tells him off and says, no way, and this is, why is this astonishing to these country fishermen? Well, how did you feel about the scene? Forget about, we don't have to talk about causation and motivation. How did you feel when Danny told off the officer, the police officer? Pleased, satisfied, disappointed, felt they were rule breakers?
I just wanted to comment that I think that there's not a lot of comment with people. And I think it may be, for myself at least, because I just kind of, unlike how we watch some of the heavier movies where I pay a lot of attention to how it gets there, I just kind of sat back and took in the movie, and
Enjoyed
I don't think
You know what?
parsed it in a sense. So it's kind of nice listening to you doing it, but I think that's probably why.
Okay. And here's why I'm doing it, because I knew most of us would feel that way. This movie is totally self-explanatory.
Right.
It slides right through. Emotionally, all the relationships track, the conflicts track, it's all clear. Nobody asks, what did she mean when she said, you're a better man than he was? That's a famous comment from some unnamed person you may remember. It didn't need any explanation. And that's why I hesitated to program this for us, because what are we going to talk about? It's so clear. But already we've discovered it's all about, well, okay, we've discovered a lot of things about it. Melissa, please.
Well, I think just a question I'd like to pose for people to unpack is that sometimes I watch films and even like romantic comedies, and you don't believe it. You don't believe the connection between people, but that didn't happen for me here. Like, I really felt like I understood their relationships, even Danny and Alwyn. I felt like I got how they got there. And I believed the chemistry between everybody in the movie. And I guess I'm wondering if everybody else felt that way, and what makes it work like that in a film? What makes us believe it like that if we do?
Well, that's why I'm breaking it down like this, because all the changes in relationships happen slowly but clearly over time. And they were all connected too. Look, Alwyn is Jim's daughter. Jim is Jago's son. Jago is clearly the elder in the group, and nobody is neglected. You know, maybe some aren't served as well as others, but that's why when thinking about how we could do tonight, I thought this film seems so simple. I'd like to reveal the filmmaker's hand and show you how all this was very calculated in a beautiful, delicate way, not obvious, not corny too much, not ham-fisted. And that's why it works on us, because they thought of what will it take to get people to believe that Danny's really sincere, both in his pursuit of the musical success and in his pursuit of Alwyn, you know, even when he doesn't know it, you know. So you bring up a great point, is we don't have to take it apart if you don't want to. Believe me, I don't need to, but that's why I do make notes.
No,
but I
that
needed
wasn't
to.
a criticism. That I think that it's interesting to people to hear how a film that we just sat back and said it felt good,
Right.
how it came to be meaningful.
This is as carefully plotted as Song of Names or Everything is Illuminated, all those far more complex films. But the same care went into making sure you understood every scene and how it needed to happen before the next scene, and how they all moved the momentum of the narrative forward. So that's how it's done. So, you know, we'll try not to get too textbooky or theoretical about it, but it's working on you. I mean, and the filmmakers knew this, and they did it with great expertise. Melissa, I want to say, one, people with British accents always sound more intelligent because of it. And it's a joke you can say in front of them. They love it, you know, because they know there are plenty of stupid Englishmen. Just ask them and they'll tell you. The other thing is that it's beautiful compared to our flat speech, you know, and the nuances, and not that we can tell Cockney from London, from Cornwall, but that it's so textured, you know. Well, we have our own dialects. We've got Southern, and we've got Texas, and we've got Maine and Vermont, you know, but it's far more interesting when you hear it from a British person or an Aussie, right? Or a person from South Africa. You know, you listen after a couple sentences and you know where they're from. So it's charming, you know, so that worked on us. And then there was the music that is like an Uber seduction of us, the viewers, because the songs were so fun, right? And the guys enjoyed singing them so much. It's like it's instant, you know, sing one more for me. And usually they had some connections, and sometimes not as strong as others, with the story. Maybe I made a note of one of them, one of the songs that sort of took off from the last scene.
While you're checking that, one of the Reiners, I think Frank would like to say something.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing about that struck me, that normally you would think that, at least I did, that in a rather isolated village with I guess television involved and whatever, they seem to be, the villagers seem to be very up to date on the latest latest pop stuff, latest dance trends, latest whatever. They certainly weren't hidden from the modern world.
Well, that was an example of how the fragility of their lives on the water made them. They embraced all the modern electronic tools. They had cell phones, they had radios, they had helicopters, they had gear, because this was a matter of survival for them, not to stay in the past. And we learned late in the film about the terrible tragedy that not Jim's father, but another guy's father, they were the two survivors. We can come to that later. That's revealed very late in the film, but it's sort of, that helps us approach what the pub means to them. So they chose not to stay in the old world. It's like modern Orthodox, if I can carry the metaphor. If it makes our life better and safer, we'll do it, but I'm not going to violate any of my principles or my beliefs or my rituals if I can. I don't have to wear long hair and never shave and, only, not travel too much on Saturdays. But the faith for me, the belief, the connection for me to this tradition is deeper than the ritual, and the tradition can sustain me with the way I embrace it in a modern interpretation. And these guys do. So I'm glad you brought that up. I hadn't thought of it. But yeah, they're not hillbillies from the holler, and frankly, Cornwall is a huge tourist destination, and they've had plenty of city folk come through there. That's why there's a B&B, and why the pub has stayed alive barely. So I think that takes care of that. I couldn't find any, the song reference I have is at the end, but we were talking about why Danny earns a lot of brownie points with the fisherman on the boat when he stands up to the police officer, and I've been going to Stan David's class too much because I have all these examples of biblical defenses coming back.
Good, it's good.
Well, I mean, these strangers, or he was a stranger to the men having their picture taken. Nobody's ever asked to have their picture taken on a boat, no less. But it was okay because Alwyn was doing it. And then this stranger to them comes up and gives lip to the meddling police officer. The fishermen know they're not fishing and they're not in the wrong, and there's no reason to pull protocol on them. So when some stranger comes to your defense, you take him in as one of your own. So that was a great scene because it advanced Danny's status and the trustworthiness that the fisherman had of him a lot. And really satisfying scene for me. And I think then, of course, we go to the bar, and there's a confrontation at the bar. I forget what it was. I think the gruff guys, the guys from the other village come in.
Yes. The game.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The guy with a beard.
They were there for-
One of them was Jim's
X.
daughter's
father-in-law.
Alwyn's ex. Yeah. The guy with the beard, the lumberjack guy.
Right.
I mean, it's funny how these stereotypes, all the other fishermen were clean shaven, but he's, he probably had some tattoos and maybe piercings.
Alvin's ex-father-in-law.
Yes. Father, or was that her ex?
Father-in-law. No, it was ex-father-in-law. Ex-father-in-law.
Thank you, Mitch. But then, this is one of the charming pieces about it. 1 minute, Arlene. The guys come in and they're all gruff and threatening and menacing, but then they have a trivia contest with 60s rock and roll music. It's like out of left field, but it totally fits. They have internet. They lived through the 60s. Look at the age of the people. I mean, the older ones. And it was great music too. And of course, Danny proves his worth again by having some right answers, including, who was it? The Beatles or Elvis? Who's the most?
Elvis.
He said the Beatles, but she insisted on Elvis. Who won that one? I forget. But the point is, she did.
Yeah, she did.
So they're engaging now in not this debate about the wrong way street, but about the music legends they love, which is a different kind of argument, isn't it? It's a different kind of engagement. And it's just another step closer to being close. So that was fun.
Arlene and Arthur, did you want to say
Yeah.
something?
Oh, all I was going to say was that there they are in this pub, in this out of the way place, and they're having trivia night.
Yeah.
I thought that was hysterical. And she made Alwyn made a comment on her way back to the pub before trivia night, saying her dad was going to be furious with her if she misses trivia night. And it was such an interesting take on what people are doing, like in COVID, when you're in the house, you're doing nothing or talking to other people. And they had all of this in common. I thought that was very funny.
Well, this, in a way, I mean, you notice we didn't see a church service, but this was their church, you know, where everybody could speak equally on equal ground. And it's very communal. It was like, well, they're playing with each other. You know, it's deathly serious business, this fishing, and don't you dare insult the superstitions. But when we have a few beers and we go to trivia night, that's where we're playing with each other. And we can play on our knowledge of each other, and suddenly all the animosity to the other crowd pales because we can do that. So, you know, it's another sociological comment on what does it take to feel comfortable with the other side, if there is another side, with a stranger. And that's the first time when we hear somebody says the pub means a lot to the village. And we don't really quite know how much until quite at the end. But Danny, one of his guys, his friends at the music label, is getting married, and his wife wants local flavor, and it happens to be in Cornwall, at an estate in Cornwall. And so the fishermen go to sing at the wedding, and they're a colossal flop, aren't they? So they're the fish out of water at that one. I thought that was amusing, but they're unfazed by it. They don't care. It's like, we are who we are. You know, they're like the bad fraternity boys, you know. We don't care what you think of us. We still have the highest grade average in the college. You know, it's like they have something that's unassailable, and that is each other. And there's actually a line after that, their own defense at the wedding, that it's a sense of community that's lost. Without a group like ours or a place like ours. That's what those weddings are about. And then about an hour into it, I can't read my own writing. I'm so sorry. I should do it from memory instead of writing it down. He has to prove himself again. And help me out with our memory here. He's resigned. You know, he says, I believe in the musicians, and there's proof in the popularity of the pub that people embrace it. Even, sorry, was there a song where everybody, even strangers, joined in? Some kind of social thing? They sing a song. Oh, the song for the Queen.
Before the big audition.
They go pub. What do you call
Crawling.
it? Crawling.
In London.
In London.
That's right.
Right, and then they're supposed
they go to London to pitch themselves to
right.
And they're a big hit in London. And poor Danny is at a restaurant, fancy restaurant for them, and he, you know, Jim has to say over the cell phone, "No, we're all too tired. We're not out drinking. We'll see you in the morning." And then they continue their raucous time because Up She Rises is a great song that everybody in the pub can get behind. Yo-ho and Up She Rises, which we've all heard at one time in our lives. So it's like they're continuing to have fun together. And you see this is an indication that the sophisticated London crowd will accept them because they're tapping into something pretty fundamental here. Not just music, but shared experience, you know, shared song they can all sing together. And the people at the club even laugh because they know Jim is putting Danny on. Yeah, Fern, what?
I just think that it wasn't just the people there. No, it's fundamental. I think the watchers begin to understand that these people who, we might dismiss as country bumpkins, they have a deep, and they have a value that we may discount because of the way they live. It's not fancy, it's not educated and so on. And I think as the movie moves on, we come to appreciate who they are. They're not just people in a pub.
Mm-hmm. Well, in a way, this turns the table because they are the outsiders in London. Yet they find acceptance with the Londoners, just the way Danny had to find acceptance by going out on the fishing boat, with that shared experience.
Isn't that what happens in a pub? We have a pub at the corner here on Main Street in Santa Monica, and that atmosphere and that singing happens right here on Main Street every weekend, right through COVID. They might have been wearing masks, but they were mostly under their chins, and the young people took over on Main Street. And I think it's the way a pub is. It doesn't matter, who it is.
So you think
it's just a fun, open atmosphere when it's a pub.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to make a bad joke, but I won't.
Frank?
We could put a pub in Congress, right? And maybe they'd talk more to each other. But
Frank, and then
in a way,
Melissa.
this is how this communality,
I'd like to
differences.
comment.
Yeah.
The comments on the pub are absolutely true. Yvette and I had a wonderful experience in Scotland. And we had an evening when we went with two other couples from our tour group. And we went into a local pub. And of course, they identified us as Americans or whatever. And it turned into a wonderful trivia contest between the Scots and the Americans about who knew the most about each other's countries. And we wound up singing. It was just a wonderful time. And that was terrific. So what those comments about a pub being a vehicle to bring on this camaraderie, we've experienced it. It's very true.
And what your experience shows is that you can even bring up in that setting, you can even make jokes about character and show your knowledge or your ignorance of the other side. And it's safe because there's this agreement that we'll have fun with each other now.
Right.
And so they weren't otherizing you as an American. They were saying, you're different, but let's have some fun with how you're different. And you're saying, you're Scottish and we're going to have some fun with how you're different too. So it's like you agree to make gentle fun with each other, and that's quite a broaching of a taboo,
Melissa?
I think this film is so much about where you're comfortable and where you're a fish out of water. And, Danny himself finds comfort in places that aren't his home and aren't his people. And yet we kind of accept him as one of them. And so do they. And I think it's the same thing with bringing the sea shanties into a bar. It seems like that is, it's a different city, but they're in a comfort zone area, even though it's a new place. I think it's when they try to go really off of that grid and they're in an office or they're at a wedding that it's just a different vibe and a different audience. But I think they're really looking for the people who feel like they can join into the shanty. That's the people that they want to perform in front of. So I think, the moments, and I think we've seen that kind of thing in other films too, where you see people who are really not in the right place for what they're trying to do. And it feels like a dismal failure, but then you get in front of your people and it suddenly starts working. I think it's the confidence that they needed to branch out, and it had to start somewhere that felt like home to them.
Okay. Now, Melissa, here's the big question for you. Why do you trust Danny?
Well, I think we know who Danny is. We know he's got ambition. We know that do I trust him? I don't know. I think he's an opportunist, but he also shows that he's going to follow through on his word.
Right. He quit his job for them. He quit his job.
Yeah. I
So
mean, he does some things that they wouldn't like as well, but I think, he looks to defend them. He looks to be loyal to them, and he doesn't always know quite how to do it. But I think we see that his heart is in the right place
and
for
they
the
do
most
too.
part.
So that's how people come together, by these little incremental things we do that indicate or prove that we're trustworthy, or they should trust us more. Take the next step with me because I got the cops to go away, or because my buddies tried to screw you, but I'm not going to, and I have skin in the game now because I'm unemployed. Okay, let's go to the song for the Queen. Now they just, they go to Island Records, which is a real company, by the way. It's Chris Blackwell's company. I didn't know if Chris Blackwell's alive anymore, but he championed reggae music, and Bob Marley, and he was a real maverick record producer. And it's no coincidence that the head of that record label is black as well. And she's buddies with Danny, and he brings his guys in, and she's not impressed. But one of the white women in the office who likes Danny, not, romantically, but says, I really liked your music, and we have a gig that we can't fill. Do you guys want it? And it's to sing.
Wait a minute. I don't think she wasn't impressed. She was impressed, but she had already been contacted by his company on the blackballing.
Right. You're right. So again, it's a dark mark against his company. They said, don't do business with him.
Right. And she was afraid she would be in trouble. But she liked them.
Again, Melissa, so his reputation has been tarnished in the business. So he's not only without a job, he's in trouble because who will hire him or who will believe him anymore? But what's interesting is that, they defer to Jim again in the stairwell there. Should we take the job or not? And he says, sure, let's try it. And so Danny goes off and thinks, oh, they're going to sing the Queen's anthem, for her birthday. And they go and they sing some shanty on, British television, and nobody knows what the hell it is, but they get discovered. And I think this is really funny. It's ironic that they violate the trust that Danny showed in them, that the network showed, that the Queen's people showed in them. They're brave enough to be who they are. And everybody's pissed off except the public, who really likes them. And this is their breakthrough moment. So again, if you're just yourself, people get you.
But
so
the song that they sang was the Cornwall Queen's Anthem or something. So they knew what they were doing, but it wasn't like they completely blew it off and sang whatever they wanted. They just
the Cornwall version of their loyalty to the Queen.
That's what,
I see.
So it was they were trying to be funny, and yet on the other side of it, that you could see that they were trying to be respectful of the Queen.
Okay, thank you for that. That increases my impression of their thoughtfulness even more. They just weren't being, we're naughty boys, we're going to be ourselves. Now we're going to show how individual we are, yet still we're loyal British citizens. So that's a great point. So that's the secret to their suddenly becoming a hot commodity. And that's when the deal happens. But simultaneously, what's his name? Sean, the skinny guy who owns the pub, right? He just can't figure out, they're behind, they're losing money. And he's a fisherman. He makes more money fishing in a share of the catch that he gets than the pub. The pub barely stays afloat. Let's put it that way. And he asked Danny for advice. Sean's lawyer says, sell it. Believe me, it's just business. And something's wrong with that, but, because Sean isn't sold on it. And he asked Danny, and Danny says, it's just business, sell it. So he signs the deal, doesn't tell anybody because he knows that the village will be just thoroughly pissed off with him and who did he sell it to? Wealthy landowner, right? The bride's father, where the wedding was held at his estate. And so that's a double betrayal. And then Sean says, well, Danny told me to do it. So all of the goodwill, this is how fragile our relationships can be. All of the goodwill that Danny has built up, is gone because the pub was more important to them than their $1 million signing deal. And then when they heard that Danny got a 2% or 1.5% commission on the deal, that was a second betrayal.
Right.
You profited from it. So Danny didn't, it was the other side of his life talking there. This business, sure, I should get something for this, for introducing you. Could have given it back to Sean, but the pub still would have been in the wealthy man's hands. But there's a teary confession. I think this is who makes the teary confession? Is it Jago? He does sort of weep, and Jim says, I'll talk if he can't, and I'll say that being with you people is the best thing in the world. But there is a boating, I forget who makes a teary confession. But then there's a boat accident, and they abandon an event because half of them had to go save a person, which is there showing their true selves. This is the code of the fisherman's code, right? You always rush to save somebody in trouble, even if it's a bunch of Londoners who fell off their surfboards and got stuck on the rocks at the beginning of the film. And then Jago dies. They come back from the rescue. Jim hits his head and he's okay. He's going to tough it out. But Jago dies after that incident. And it's kind of a sweet way to reveal. There's no gagging or gasping. His wife happens upon him and he's gone in the chair peacefully. And that's when it comes out, the betrayal of selling the pub and Danny's role in it. And that's where we learn the story of somebody tell it for me again. There was a fishing expedition and 12 of them were lost, 10 were lost, and the only 2 who survived were Jago and the burly man's father. Is that right?
I don't remember that.
And no, Sean's father. I think it's Sean's father. And Sean's father never went out to sea again because of the tragedy of the accident, PTSD. So he stayed and he bought the pub. And Sean inherited it from his father. So you see, the pub and the betrayal becomes important because the pub is not just the pub where they sing songs and joke with each other. It's connected to this tragedy that binds them together, where 12 people were killed, the worst accident that they'd had in Cornwall there. And I want to refer back to the Polish film we saw called Corpus Christi. The Wilshire Boulevard old timers may not know this, but University Synagogue people know it, about the Polish juvenile, the prison thug who killed somebody and then goes to a lumber town and impersonates a priest and uncovers a tragedy that tore the town apart, a traffic accident that killed 7 kids and one reformed alcoholic who gets blamed, whose widow is ostracized. And healing this wound was really important to healing that village. And this ex-con being a better priest to the village, ministering to his flock than the old priest. But I bring that up here to say that this is what binds the town, and it binds the town in a somber way, not in a divisive way. But selling the pub is divisive because it's besmirching the memory of the 10 fishermen who died. So we learn that quite late in the film. And this shames Danny. He's thrown out. He's ostracized from the village. Again, it's just how fragile relationships can be. The deeper in you get with people, the more you can hurt each other. And therefore, the deeper will be the retaliation. It's a very human story. And I didn't realize that until I just said it. But it's why these discussions are so great for us, because you take apart this film that's based on human connections. And there's so much in it that we all take for granted. But when we pick it apart, we realize stuff we had taken for granted. And that we realize, oh, that's why the pub's important. you know, and suddenly the pub and the songs and the trivia nights become much more than what they are. You know, their form of honoring their dead, of maintaining the traditions in the community. And it's not about the alcohol, you know, it's about the closeness that they can experience there.
So Jim, is it the connection being the pub and they're being together, or is it having experienced a traumatic event that's the binding piece?
It's all of a piece. It's all a continuity. You know, you bind with the community based upon your shared history with the people that are there. And they all still feel the loss of those 10 fishermen and the song, you know, and the damage it did to one of them, Sean's father, who could never go out to sea again, which is also heartbreaking. And so it's like they share in the loss, and the pub is a living symbol of the loss.
Roy, you want to comment, Roy?
Yeah, I want to say that in British culture, and Scottish, Irish, the pub is sort of in many ways a community center, and so it's where people meet to exchange what's going on, and so that's why it's sort of the focal point of in some ways the focal point of the film, but also there's also that personal tie with the loss of the community, many of the members. That's sort of, for me, why it is such a central sort of focus of the story.
And, you know, it's lovely. We've neglected the Danny Alwyn relationship, but it's like everything's connected in this story. Alwyn turns against him as well, throws him out, welcomes him back. They first get connected because they're dancing to 60s music. And it's coming, you know, because they've made those little steps together for whatever allows a relationship to happen. There's so many connections between people, and the pub is a character in the film. The boats are, the ocean is, Alwyn is, you know, Jago, Jim, Alwyn, you know, right there is a triple connection. And this is what makes the film so tight, is that by the end of the film, we're as conversant in the relationships as they are. And hopefully we've grown to respect them and appreciate them and embrace them the way they do. And of course, it has to end with a joke at the pub. And Jim's car is floating out to sea, but it's okay because there are better bonds than that. There's the bond of community. He sells his expensive condo in London to pay for the pub. It's a property swap to prove his worth. He redeems himself with the people to show his commitment to them, or he hopes will be commitment. I mean, he doesn't know she'll take him back, by giving up everything he had that was, you know, from his past. He's not going to be a record executive anymore. And he's saying, I have nothing left but the pub, which I own. Will you have me? And how can they say no? Alwyn as well as the people. And the one music note I have is
hold on before you, Jim,
okay.
Before you go on to the music, which I know is an important piece. Frank, did you want to say something?
Yes, Jim, you were mentioning about the authenticity of the village or whatever, and I agree. But I'd like to pay tribute to the filmmaker's art here. You know, there's no question that you felt the sea and the life of the fisherman. But did you imagine there isn't one scene where you see fish? You don't see them really hauling in fish. You do not see them catching the fish. You don't see what happens when they bring the load in. What happens, and the whole thing. There's not a fish in that movie.
Well, there is,
and yet there's no question that we accepted, you know, the whole setting. I just wanted.
It was a low budget film, and they couldn't afford the fish.
Wait a minute. We saw fish in the early part with the
beginning.
The ship. The beginning, they pulled in the net with
lobster.
But I think that's a great observation, Frank. Because
the little girl's looking for her father to come in or whatever. What did they came in? But where were the fish that they caught? Where did they do it? You know, normally you see in all these fishing village scenes, you can almost smell the fish with how they show that.
what you put your finger on is that they proved it in other ways. They convinced us. Probably the singing and the stories they told about in 1798, this happened, and this is where this superstition comes from. And we don't say rabbit on the boat, although they were ribbing him for some of it. I think that was the rabbit.
They're not allowed to catch fish. They could only catch lobsters. That's
Okay. Well, they're still called fishermen. Mitch, what you got for us?
A few things. One is that the scene of the pub in London, they did that so well by bringing out diversity in the audience. They had blacks, they had the Asians, they had Indians, and it was to prove the point that this was universal music rather than singular music that was there. Second, of course, was the point that the only person who was smart enough to realize the successes they were having was the child who said, look, it's on YouTube. And before that, nobody had ever realized that it was on YouTube. And the third was the simplicity of their life was brought out so well by the way Jugo died. He just passed away quietly. And, all of us have experienced, lingering deaths. And here was a guy who just sat down and died. And it's a good way to go.
Well, he had a full life, hadn't he? And he even says that when he chokes up in the pub earlier in the movie. It's like, this is what sustained him. I mean, he couldn't have lived anywhere else.
Melissa?
Yeah, I think, Jim, you posed the question a little bit ago about, what makes their bond so strong. And I think one of the things that I liked about the film, and maybe this is just true of small towns, is that everybody felt really important there, and you go into these other places, these other settings in the film where that doesn't feel true of the people there, like the offices and all of that, where there's a very clear hierarchy. And I think in the town, it felt like, you've got the leaders, but everybody felt like they were a valuable member of the community, and they had whatever specific role they played, and it was custom built for them, and they were able to really make the most of themselves in that area. So I think everybody was a contributing member to their society, and that made it feel good to me. Even looking at a character like Alwyn, I really liked what they did with her. But I think that was true of everybody in the film.
Yeah, even she who said, we have to move forward. I'm not going to stay stuck in the past. In a way, that's, the independence of a fisherman. I'm going to do what's right for me. And she wasn't that much of a rebel, but she had her own way and her own needs. And she was tough on Danny. It took some doing to reel her in, or for her to say yes.
Reel her in is good.
Oh, they believe me, I looked at some of the advertising for this movie, and the first catch line was "fish out of water," and I used it in one of my emails to you. It's like, I guess being a fisherman is so far from our movie experiences that we were suckered enough into believing that they were, even without seeing a fish. But they showed this genuineness in other ways. I mean, they were great actors, just chewing up the scenery, enjoying every minute of their lines, every moment. It's satisfying when the people performing it are so into it. So that's all I have. If you people want to bring up anything, we can talk about it. Again, I was worried about this film. I knew you'd all like it, but I didn't know what we'd have to say about it. But I too feel like I discovered a lot about community by taking apart this film. And I think, Fern, you nailed it, that we all just sat back and enjoyed it without thinking how much was there. But when you pick it apart, you realize there's a lot there, and it's all premeditated and planned out by the filmmakers. So it's a real lesson, and I'm grateful we could all go there with it. So if nobody wants to say anything more about this film, I can tell you about the next film.
Jim,
Jim,
I just, before you jump on to the next film, I wanted to comment on something that somebody had raised after our last discussion regarding, I think, Winter Journey, regarding the
Yeah.
The Holocaust survivor. And they pointed out one piece that we hadn't talked about, and that was the importance of the desert in our biblical history. Of the exile, of being in exile. It wasn't an accident. We were talking about why did the father move to Arizona of all.
Tucson.
It seemed so it seems so odd, to Tucson. And it probably was no accident that you've got somebody who is exiled to a desert. It's part of our history.
I think that's a great observation. I talked about the sterility and the use, remember the snow on the cactus, and it is a character in it. And I relate it to the fact that he could hide out there. In the desolation, there was nobody to remind him of his deceased family, who blamed him for their deaths. Roy, what's your take on it?
Well, didn't both he and his wife decide to move there after she
and after she died, he said she liked it here.
Right. And he stayed there because it was his connect. I mean, for those of us who are widowers, you know, you want to maintain a presence to, you know, your former spouse. And so he stayed there as much as I think. And this is, I've been thinking a lot about this film, and particularly the music, and you know that Schubert piece, the Winterreise.
Yeah,
it, you know, half of the work is about is the part of the person processing someone else's death afterwards, metaphorically, and the connection for, you know, the father with the desert. You know, it deeply connects him to his former wife. And so I think that's definitely why.
Thanks for that. I agree. Anybody else want to chime in on Winter Journey? That was another film that like, it just resonated so much with each of us in our own ways. It brings out, you know, your stuff, which is only movies can do it, or plays. Books, of course. But it's this suspension of disbelief. Like, they're actors, they're not fishermen, but we pretended to go along with it because we were getting something out of it. We were getting this deep connection that it roped in our imagination, you know, so that we could believe the picture the filmmakers were presenting to us. Any other comments about Winter Journey or tonight? Okay, good. I'm glad y'all had a good time with the movie. Melissa?
I had a question. I thought Winter Journey was really interesting, but I disliked the style of the film very much. And I wasn't sure, what was that? Was it typical of that style? Like, what am I looking for?
The style is cinema verite, cinema of truth, the French would call it. And it's not a new style. It's sort of came out of when cameras got to be really portable in the 60s, and you could run around with them and make documentaries. You could also make feature films that simulated reality because you could be there in a moment with an actor. But cinema verite documentaries are really off the shoulder, run and gun is an expression, films that follow real people doing what they do in reality and capturing it. Reality television would have you believe it's all the way they say it is. Believe me, it's all very manufactured, having been through those battles myself for 15 years. But verite is a kind of style where the filmmaker doesn't seem to intrude upon what people are saying or doing. So you're a fly on the wall.
I also found that with that film, it felt like there was a mixture of a number, like I felt like I was always watching something different. Is that typical of verite, or is it?
No, not necessarily, but there are documentary elements in this, such as his trip, you know, the black and white as well as the color footage to his hometown. You know, the black and white sort of set the scene for the pre-Holocaust era. where it was happy and good. So we knew what the young couple were running away from. The color footage of the gardens, that's where he grew up, you know, as opposed to the barrenness of the desert or the black and white footage. So yeah, they were mixing styles. They were mixing, I don't want to say styles, they were mixing techniques. But basically, if it had just been verite, raw verite, it would have been the son interviewing the father from behind the camera with no cutaways to other images of Altenburg or the gardens or the Nazi era. No reenactments. I mean, these served like reenactments of what the dad was describing. So,
Artie, did you want to add something?
Well, one of the interesting things about that, we missed the discussion last week, but we saw the film. One of the interesting things about the technique was that you had live characters moving among still pictures.
yes, that technique.
That was a very interesting technique to be using in a number of those scenes from the Nazi Germany portion of the movie.
Yeah.
They interspersed the young man,
Yeah.
who turned out to be the father, in those scenes, with the background being absolutely still photos of.
Right. The
of
one that
what's
sticks
going
out
on.
for me is
For
where
what it's worth, I would like to say that my life often feels like that when I consider my family's history. That there are these still photos of people. I mean, it's a wonderful metaphor. These still photos of people who were my family, who I never met because they were killed, and a history I didn't participate in, and I'm walking among it, feeling what I feel.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's an.
well, this is what the son craved. Dad, let me into your life. I want to be there with you. You never let me in. So Arthur, thanks for bringing that up. It's so astute and so right for the film. This is the plaintive cry of the son. Some people complained he was too aggressive and overbearing and assertive, or even offensive. But the overall style is verite, is documentary camera. You don't see the filmmaker intrude, but the voice tells you the son is really beating up his dad. You know, being very critical. Oh, he says, "Oh, come on, Dad. You know, you didn't have to stay, or you hated selling furniture." And
Right.
so it's a very intrusive filmmaker, which only a son could do. Risa?
I just want to say that going to Tucson,
Yeah.
Going to Tucson is not really going just to the desert. They have world famous orchestra and ballet that are very well known. And it makes sense for them to go to a place where that exists.
Well, maybe, I mean, remember, he was not performing, but she continued to perform.
She continued to perform, right? Because
and they were in St. Louis and elsewhere and wound up in Tucson.
Right,
so.
but Tucson is not, you know, it's just not an empty desert place.
No.
There is music, there is orchestra.
Well, sure, he could drive to the concert hall. You know, there was that scene where he actually goes and the son stays with him, photographs him enjoying the music. All right, let's talk about Dick Johnson is Dead. I know you're going to love that as well because you loved The Mole Agent. It's a film about a psychiatrist. They tell us he's a Mormon, but I don't know how that fits in because he's such a sweet man. Not that Mormons can't be sweet, before I dig myself in a hole here, but there's nothing religious about him. He's a humanist through and through. And he has dementia. He's been diagnosed. And you learn that right away in the beginning of the movie. And the daughter, she's an assistant camera person on action films. And nobody really knew much about her because she was just an assistant. But she decided that she had to have something to do with her father while he was cogent. So that together they decide to do a documentary on possible ways he might have accidents because of his dementia. And it sounds cruel, but it works so well because it's not about the accidents they staged. She engaged stuntmen that she knew. She called in favors. The low budget film she financed herself. I think it may have been a Sundance film for finishing money. But, you know, she knew a lot of people in the film community. So she hired the gaffers, the riggers of stunts, the stunt directors and the stunt performers to stage all these accidents. You know, she had people who looked like him, who could double for him, you know, but after the refrigerator hit him falling from the second floor, the guy getting up was her father. You know, it was cute, and they were very well done stunts. But it's all of this, you know, when you're aware of your own mortality, you thumb your nose at the Grim Reaper because you're determined to live all you can. You know, that they're not going to intrude in this life. And that's the kind of guy he was, you know, just totally accessible to his family, his grandchildren. And it's a relationship film more than anything else. And these stunts continue on. I won't ruin the ending for you, but ultimately you're the victim of the stunt.
Jim, when will that be?
This is, I think, excuse me for being suicidal, but I think it's going to be next Saturday.
All
Okay,
right.
so
Your email said 7/3, which happens to be
Yeah,
tonight.
I screwed up.
It's
Sometimes I
next
do these
Saturday,
things on
not Wednesday.
autopilot.
All right.
It's next Saturday, the 10th. I'll send you out a blurb on that. But it's a charming film, and don't be afraid of it. It's not about Alzheimer's because he's thoroughly there. But it informs us, you know, it's sort of part of the Alzheimer's story with the mole agent and with the father coming up and still Alice. It should be seen together because you can begin to put together a picture of these lives and different ways of dealing with that problem. It's a lot of fun. You'll laugh. There are a couple tearful moments, but it's a celebration of life. And I was skeptical, you know, but when I saw it, I said, I have to program this for us because I know all of us gray hairs will like it. And so trust me, as you have in the past. And so that's next Saturday. It's on Netflix. So it's free for those of you who belong. And it's really worth seeing. And Roy, did you have something to say, or was that just a hand gesture?
I was just showing off my gray hair.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, on you,
Well,
it's
there's a lot of
distinguished.
it. It's very nice.
Yeah, could you have it? All right. Well, if you don't mind finishing early, this was great. Thank you for opening up the film for me too. This is why we structure it this way. I have to tell you a story. I guess the first joint film we had was Those Who Remained, the first full-blown. And there was a husband and wife team who attended that. Didn't say anything, but I got an email from them. I will not name them, who complained about our format. That, yeah, Risa, for real. and she was an ex-school teacher. And she said, you know, it's really good if you give us questions in advance so we can prepare for the discussion. So I had to mount that hurdle. And then I guess maybe the truth really came out. She was uncomfortable with our talk of the sexual innuendo between the doctor and the young girl. Why did that have to go on for so long? And I said, well, if we didn't go there with it, we would have been denying a big part of the movie's success, the tension that it kept us in. And so I probably spent an hour and a half on my response, and I countered all of her notices, and she has yet to join us. So I'm sorry our format is so bad at bringing us out and sharing things with each other that mean something to us, but it seems to work. So
We love you. Don't worry about it.
we'll keep it up unless I have other complaints, but it was the only one.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you all for
Thank you.
joining.
Good
Bye.
night.
Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, Jim.
Welcome. Thank you, Fern. Let me leave.
Hello.